thousands of years, empires have risen and fallen across the Middle East. But building and maintaining a lasting empire centered on Iran has always been extraordinarily difficult. Why does this land, time and again, swallow empires whole? Let us go back to the very beginning of recorded civilization in this region. The Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great stands as one of history's most remarkable achievements. At its height, it stretched from modern-day Greece all the way to the edges of India, encompassing dozens of languages, cultures, and religions. Yet even this extraordinary creation, born from genuine genius and organizational brilliance, carried within it the seeds of future collapse. Understanding why requires us to look closely at the land itself, the people who inhabited it, and the brutal economics of imperial ambition. Start with geography, because geography is destiny. Iran is not simply a country. It is a fortress built by nature. The Zagros Mountains run like a massive spine down the western edge, creating natural barriers that have stopped invading armies for millennia. The Alborz Range guards the north, sitting between the Iranian plateau and the Caspian Sea like a stone wall no military engineer could improve upon. To the east, the situation becomes even more extreme. Two of the world's most hostile deserts, the Dasht-e Kavir and the Dasht-e Lut, cover enormous portions of the interior. Summer temperatures in these regions can exceed 70 degrees Celsius on the surface. Armies cannot march through them. Supply lines cannot sustain themselves across them. Civilizations cannot easily grow within them. This geography created something deeply paradoxical. The mountains and deserts that protected Iranian civilization from outside invasion also fragmented the population into isolated pockets of settlement. Valleys separated by impossible terrain became home to distinct communities with their own languages, loyalties, and traditions. Any ruler attempting to build a unified empire from this base immediately confronted a fundamental problem. How do you govern people you can barely reach? How do you collect taxes from communities that can simply retreat into mountain strongholds when imperial administrators arrive? Now layer on top of this geographic challenge the extraordinary ethnic and tribal diversity of the Iranian world. The Persian heartland was never purely Persian in any simple sense. Medes, Parthians, Bactrians, Elamites, Sogdians, and dozens of other groups all inhabited regions that successive empires claimed to control. Each group maintained its own internal hierarchies, its own systems of loyalty, and its own understanding of legitimacy. When a central government grew weak, these groups did not simply wait patiently. They pursued their own interests, formed their own alliances, and often took up arms against whoever claimed to sit on the imperial throne. This brings us to the crushing problem of internal rebellions. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, magnificent as it was, experienced constant revolts in its outer provinces. Egypt rebelled repeatedly. Babylon required multiple military campaigns to pacify. The Greek city-states along the western frontier resisted Persian control with famous stubbornness. Each rebellion required military resources, competent commanders, and royal attention. When those resources were stretched thin across an empire spanning 3 continents, even a temporarily distracted central government could find itself facing simultaneous crises in multiple directions at once. The Parthians, who eventually replaced the Seleucid successors of Alexander the Great across Iranian territory, understood something that many imperial builders forgot. Direct control is expensive. The Parthian system relied heavily on semi-autonomous local rulers who pledged loyalty to the Parthian king, but maintained their own armies, collected their own revenues, and governed their own territories with considerable independence. This system created a more stable arrangement in some respects, but it also meant that Parthian power was always somewhat hollow at its edges. When Rome pushed hard along the western frontier, the Parthians could resist, but never quite deliver a decisive victory. When internal succession disputes erupted, those semi-autonomous lords frequently picked sides, and the entire empire trembled. Then came the Sassanid Persian Empire, arguably the most sophisticated and administratively capable imperial system Iran ever produced. The Sassanids lasted for over 4 centuries, fought Rome and then Byzantium to a bloody standstill across generations of warfare, developed complex bureaucratic systems, and created cultural achievements that influenced art and architecture from Constantinople to China. Yet even the Sassanids ultimately fell, and the circumstances of their fall tell us everything about the structural weaknesses we have been examining. By the early 7th century, the Sassanid Empire had fought Byzantium in a series of devastating wars. Both empires had essentially bled each other white. The Sassanid military, once a formidable fighting machine, had been stretched, depleted, and demoralized. The treasury was exhausted. Tax burdens on the population had grown crushing. Internal political instability had produced a rapid succession of rulers in the years immediately before the Arab-Muslim conquests began. In roughly 2 decades following the death of the Prophet Muhammad, Arab armies swept across the Sassanid heartland, and the empire essentially ceased to exist. 4 centuries of imperial architecture collapsed with shocking speed because the underlying economic and military foundations had already rotted away. Now consider Nader Shah, perhaps the most dramatic example of this pattern in the early modern period. Emerging from humble origins in the early 18th century, he essentially rescued the Safavid dynasty from Afghan invaders, then dispensed with the Safavids entirely, and crowned himself Shah of Iran in 1736. His military campaigns were genuinely astonishing. He pushed deep into the Mughal Empire, capturing Delhi and carrying away treasures, including the legendary Peacock Throne. He fought the Ottomans, the Russians, and various Central Asian powers. At his peak, his empire stretched across an enormous expanse of West and Central Asia. But Nader Shah never solved the fundamental problems. His campaigns required constant money. Constant money required constant taxation. Constant taxation produced resentment, resistance, and eventually open revolt. The tribal coalitions that had supported his rise began to fragment as the costs of his ambitions became clear. He grew increasingly paranoid and violent in his later years, executing commanders and nobles who might have been genuine threats, or might simply have attracted his suspicion. When he was assassinated in 1747, his empire had no stable institutional foundation to survive the shock. Within years, the territory he had conquered fragmented among competing successors. The Zand dynasty took parts of Iran proper. The Durrani dynasty emerged in Afghanistan. The Ottoman and Russian empires reclaimed border territories. Everything Nader Shah built dissolved like morning fog. This pattern, so consistent across Iranian history, reflects deeper truths about empire building itself. Conquest is genuinely easier than governance. A brilliant military commander can win battles, intimidate rivals, and seize territories within a single lifetime. But creating the institutional structures, the bureaucratic networks, the economic systems, and the cultural consensus necessary to hold an empire together across generations requires something different entirely. It requires time, stability, and often luck in the form of competent successors. Iran's geography guaranteed that governance would always be expensive and difficult. Its ethnic diversity guaranteed that building genuine consensus would always require enormous skill and patience. Its position at the crossroads of major trade routes brought wealth, but also brought constant pressure from powerful neighbors who had their own imperial ambitions. Every empire that rose from Iranian territory faced these challenges simultaneously, and every empire eventually found them too much to manage. History shows us that Iran has produced some of the ancient world's most powerful and culturally sophisticated empires. The organizational genius of Cyrus, the military brilliance of Nader Shah, the administrative sophistication of the Sassanids, all deserve genuine admiration. But the real challenge was never the initial conquest. The real challenge was stability, keeping together what ambition had assembled. And across 4,000 years of history, that challenge has defeated every empire Iran ever produced. The mountains remain, the deserts remain, and the question of whether any central power can truly govern this extraordinary, fractured, beautiful land remains as relevant today as it was when Cyrus first rode out to build something that would outlast him. It never quite did.